Hey everybody, Zach here, and we're going to be talking all about universal design for learning. And for this screencast, it's really to give you a background knowledge to build up your understanding of what UDL is so that next week, when we do some designing of universally designed experiences, you'll be able to draw from this background and make awesome stuff. And so let's move to the goal of this screencast. The goal of our time is for you to be able to articulate the foundations of universal design for learning. Think of this like an elevator speech, or like, oh, I'm going to try to sketch out a representation of UDL on the back of a napkin so that I can tell somebody about it. You're going to just get surface level for this screencast so that, again, you can apply this surface level and go deeper and deeper in your design as we go through the course. And so this is a great time to pause. Write down what are your goals for understanding as you go through this screencast. What are the major questions that you'd like to get answered in the screencast? And so this is a great time to pause and do some expert learning yourself. And you don't need to write it. You can draw it. You can do it in however way. Put a voice memo together. I don't really care. Just as long as you think about yourself and what you need in order to understand and access this goal. All right, awesome. So the UDL foundations, here's actually a visual representation of the screencast. What we're trying to do is get the foundational beliefs that UDL is built on into your heads so that you can understand them, see what the design lens is based on. And then once you understand these and see these foundational beliefs as actually part of our human experience, then the work of UDL becomes the designing with the guidelines in mind, using the guidelines to design instructional experiences. So we're going to talk about both, but we're going to start with the beliefs, the foundations of UDL first. And the first foundation that I'd like to talk about is this idea of variability, the idea that humans are not all the same. Diversity is a thing. Go to a sporting good game, go out in public and just look at the faces and the dress and what we drive and what we listen to. We obviously are not all built the exact same way. And rather than see that as a liability or see that as something to work around, UDL says that is awesome. We're going to design something that embraces human variability, that assumes it's in existence, and creates awesome experiences. Here's another representation of the concept of human variability, and as it relates to specifically instructional design. So historically, when we designed instruction, we thought, well, what's the path that most of our learners will be able to access? Think of this as like a bell curve. What's the average learner's path? And so in doing that, right, we said, okay, most people are here. Let's design a singular way to get them from not knowing stuff to knowing stuff. In doing that, we created a rather narrow kind of lane for people to walk where they had to adjust to the design rather than having the design adjust to them. And what UDL is doing is saying, why not just do an adjustable or flexible design that is able to adapt to the needs of the people? So an example of this is, or how it does this, is by looking to the margin. So who are the people that are absolutely not being served well? Doesn't matter what their label is, doesn't matter what their support needs are. It really doesn't. Just who needs extra or more intensive layers of support, who needs a radically different instruction, who needs the visuals, who needs the video, who needs to be able to use their voice in order to show understanding, who needs extension, who needs to see this concept represented in different ways in order to really, really see the impact of it outside of just a symbolic way, right? Who are the ones that need supports? Who are the ones that need challenge? Their needs, right? What they need and what's important for them becomes beneficial for everybody. And so it says, look to the margins and then kind of design your way through that. So that is the idea of variability. The next big idea related to UDL is the idea of context. And the idea of context is that the situations and environments a student is placed in matter just as much as the skills they come with. Here's what this means, right? If you put me in a place where success or failure is dependent on my ability to drive a 70-foot bus, I'm probably going to be the one that needs supports, right? If you put me in the place where I have to know what all of these symbols mean and be able to apply these symbols to the world, then I'm probably going to be the one that needs supports. Whereas, like, I actually feel pretty good about being thrown into an environment where I have to survive or go on a hike. Like, I probably wouldn't need supports there. I wouldn't need supports if I had to read a book, right? Depending on the reading level or the Lexile level to a group of students, right? Playing video games. I do need supports for that. I am not awesome at playing video games. So you get the picture. Context actually makes us, the learner themselves, more variable within themselves, right? Meaning, like, it's not just that the world around us has variability and like the humanness of the room and the humans that are in the room. Also, like, people themselves, me as an individual, I have variable skill sets. And depending on the context, there'll be contexts where I just can knock it out of the park with no supports at all. And there'll be contexts where I'll need a ton of supports, or I wouldn't even be able to access unless I had like some very specific and long-term instruction happen. And so this is the idea of context, that we are really, really dynamic and diverse in what we need. So Todd Rose talks quite a bit about this whole idea of a learning profile. And he talks about a jagged learning profile and the idea that we need supports in some contexts. We don't need supports in others. We need an instructional model that's able to meet us where we are, right? That's flexible. And the other thing that's, something I'm passionate about then is really exemplified through a jaggedness or a jagged learning profile is the labels we give kids aren't always that helpful. Meaning, if for a specific context I see that a kid needs supports, and so I call that kid my low kid. Oh, this is my low group, or he's one of my low kids. Oftentimes, this label will follow those students into places where it has no business, right? Because they've been labeled low, the system doesn't see them ever as being the high kid, right? And so in this context where speaking is what is primarily rewarded, or where it's built on, that kid, because they're labeled as low, oftentimes the teachers or the educators or the system designers don't give them the opportunity to be high or to be a kid that can shine. The same thing here, though, for the kid that's labeled as high. Because they're labeled as high in this specific area and everyone expects that highness to be able to translate across contexts, oftentimes the system is ill prepared when they struggle or doesn't know what to do, or expects them never to struggle and never to need interventions or remediation. And so that kid isn't given the dignity to need help and to say, I don't know how to do this system, like, help me understand. And so the whole idea of context allows us to look at our learners more diversely and really undergirds the importance of being able to design instruction so that it's really flexible. So that if you come into this context and you need supports, we have the supports already built for you. If you come into this context needing challenge or needing something new or novel because you already have a lot of background knowledge of this, then we have a path and we can design something for you. It's just being flexible. It's having a multiple paths so that kids can access wherever they are. This last little slide here is a fun slide because it's a story representation of context. So I was a former special day class teacher. That was my first job out of college, was to work in a special day setting. I tried to build as many inclusive experiences as I possibly could as a teacher and actually push the needle quite a bit with the percentage of time kids spent in inclusive context. But the full disclosure, it was a self-contained setting. And so in this class, though, I was one of the first teachers to be given iPads. And so we built lessons that were dependent and had a lot of technology interwoven within them so that the students I served in this class got really good at using the technology. They could do Edmodo, they could post videos, they could post text, they could use their voice, and their voice would type for them. They could respond to each other both in a voice tag or in a typed out response. It was great. I was so proud of this class with all my classes as they started to adapt and develop skills around technology. Well, sometimes we'd have kids that would come in from other classes, from general education classes, and they would need to, have a cool off space, or the teacher would just need them to come into my class. And rather than push them to the outside tables, we always brought them right into where the learning was happening. And we'd hand them iPads, or there'd be iPads in the supply table. And the students that needed the remediation, that needed the interventions, were not the students on IEPs. The students that needed the interventions were the students coming from general education. Because in my context, you really needed to have tech skills in order to be successful. And because the students that were in my context had developed the tech skills, they actually became the coaches to kids coming from general education, where certain students, it was awesome. You'd get a kid on their communication device trying to coach this kid on how to use Edmodo. So that's how powerful context can be. It literally removed the disabling factor from the environment because of the kids that had the disability were the ones that were providing the support. And the kids who were disabled in that context were the ones that didn't know how to use the technology. And so that's the idea of context. So the last foundational piece is we need clear goals and loose means, meaning I need to be really, really clear on what I'm trying to teach my students, and then be equally open with how they meet my clear expectations. So I need to know what it is I'm teaching really deeply, so that then I know, more importantly, what I can be tight-fisted with and what I can be open with in terms of how kids show what they know or how kids learn the content. So allow for options and opportunities that still connect to that singular content. So, and the reason for this is that we need to remove instructional barriers for our students. So for our students who are, we lost it. Let me bring it back. For students that are struggling, we need to be able to think about what they need. Let me pause. All right, I'm back. Fixed it. So the big idea of UDL is by having clear goals with loose means, that allows us, so if there was only one way to get to China, right? And we said everybody has to go to China from a port over here in South America. Well, that's fine for the person from South America, but the person in Canada is going to have a real hard time with that, right? Because there's all sorts of barriers that are in front of them, preventing them from getting down to South America to then load on board to the ship and make it to China. And so think of that now instructionally. What are the engagement barriers that prevent kids from being able to access the learning? We have strategies now that can remove those barriers. What are the representation barriers that prevent kids from understanding a concept, from getting to know it really deeply and understanding the important language connected to it? We now have skills, or we have strategies that can remove those barriers if we design towards them. And then think about barriers related to action expression. So the kid understands, they're interested, but the way that we're currently asking them to show what they know is a way that doesn't work for them. And so all that knowledge that they have becomes locked away so that we can't see it. And so by providing clear goals, but having loose means for kids to show their understanding or to access those goals, we are going to remove barriers. And this whole process, I really like this quote by Franklin D. Roosevelt: "A smooth sea never made a skillful sailor." The big idea here is our classrooms are super diverse. Our student populations are super diverse, both as we look at their faces and where they come from and what they need in terms of culture and preference and perspective and worldview, but also within themselves in terms of their skill sets, depending on the different contexts they're in. And so what this means is the more you get used to thinking and trying to find and get access to learners that push you, the better you become as an educator. Whereas before, those learners were a liability because they just didn't fall within the design. The design wasn't made for them. Now that it is, and it is flexible, we want those learners in the environment because they make us better. They become the challenge, right? The waves for us to navigate. And then over time, as we learn how to navigate those waves, we get really much faster at our design. We get much more creative with our design. We understand our content much deeper and with more clarity because we've had to teach just a really diverse population of students what it is and how to access it. And so this whole idea of UDL is over time, you become really, really good at your job because you embrace the variability of your classroom. And that variability is constantly going to be pressure testing you to try to find and push you into new ways to design. And so UDL is always an iterative process. It's always getting better. You're always reflecting and trying to improve on your instructional design, which then leads me to the 3 principles of UDL. And I've already kind of alluded to those a bit as I've been talking. Oh, it's happened again. Let me pause it and fix it. And we're back. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Anyway, our UDL principles are: we design multiple ways to get kids engaged. We design multiple ways to represent information, and we design multiple ways for students to show their understanding and to use tools and strategies to show what they've learned within our learning environments. And that leads us to the UDL guidelines themselves. So these were the principles, and now we're going to look at the guideline template. I'm going to go to full screen for this. So I'm sorry about the font. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but let's jump over to this one. So these are the UDL guidelines, and this is clickable. So if you want to access it and download them for print, these are really helpful to have out. But full disclosure, they can be kind of confusing. So let me work out how these are designed. So the UDL principles, first and foremost, are a great place to start when you're thinking about your instructional design. Just think like, okay, are there different ways kids are going to engage with this? Are there different ways that this big idea has been represented? Are there different ways and options that we're giving kids to show what they know? Like, those questions are very, very simple, and they can be applied to whatever style of teaching that you possibly do. And if you start there and just start doing that over time, you're going to start making connections to UDL. Guarantee it. So that's a great starting place. But within these, well, what does that mean to provide multiple means of engagement or representation and action expression? These guidelines here allow you to go deeper within each of the principles. So these are all strategies or big ideas around how to recruit interest, how to sustain effort, how to move learners to be internally motivated and self-regulate. How do you represent concepts in ways that give options for perception, options for language and symbols, options for comprehension? How do you provide options for physical action, expression and communication, and then executive functioning? All of those big ideas are called the UDL guidelines, and those help create clarity and go deeper into the big principles of UDL. The last piece, and these are ones that you just be patient with yourself with and let yourself build skills with over time. But the last piece is what's called the checkpoints. And so these allow you to go even deeper within engagement and go, well, how do you recruit interest? You do it by optimizing choice and autonomy. You do it by optimizing relevance, value, and authenticity of the learning. And you do it by minimizing threats and distractions. That's how you recruit interest. And so you can tell, you have to spend time with this, just trying stuff, working and building instruction over time, where you start thinking more deeply about engagement, thinking more deeply about representation, thinking more deeply about action expression. The analogy that we use quite a bit when we're talking about UDL is it's the idea of a set of sunglasses. I have sunglasses that I wear, and then when I look through those glasses, it paints my view of the world a specific shade of whatever the lenses are. UDL is the same way. So I apply my UDL lenses when I'm doing direct instruction. I apply my UDL lens to a 5E lesson. I apply my UDL lens to a project-based learning experience. I apply my UDL lens to my anchor charts or to my tests or my common formative assessments. So it becomes the lens that you look through. The other thing that I want to key you in as it relates to the UDL guidelines is this idea of looking at them horizontally. So here, the top bar of UDL is all around access. They call it the welcome mat for the UDL guidelines. So these are things that you can do to hook students, get them interested or be great starting places when looking at UDL. Then you have the middle row within the UDL guidelines. Then that's all around like how do you build where you move from the environment and extrinsic motivation to more intrinsic motivation, where you start to connect the students to working in collaboration, where you're starting to unpack the language related to representation, where you're starting to give kids graduated levels of release, and where you are giving them tools and strategies to start showing what they know beyond just choices, but the actual choices and tools and strategies. And then the last rung, the last row of UDL is this internalized row, which is all around providing options for self-regulation, comprehension, and executive functioning. Now we're trying to get learners to be internally motivated. Remember, the top was to be extrinsically. Now we're starting to move more towards intrinsic. Now we're in the full-blown intrinsic motivation phase where we're trying to get our learners to just take charge of their learning. And then ultimately, the goal of UDL, as we talked about last week, is for learners to be experts in learning itself, where they are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. And so those are the big ideas related to the UDL principles. Let me run through quickly some more depth within the UDL principles. So multiple means of engagement, you're really trying to work to answer the question of why. And so my favorite story to answer the question of why, or to represent the idea of multiple means of engagement, is the time that my daughter and I hunted dinosaurs. And so this is Amy, this is Grace. They're way older than this now, but I love that picture to death. And Grace was 2 years old one night, and we woke up to screams. My wife and I did. Like the scary kind of screams where you freak out as a new parent. And it was Grace. Amy wasn't around yet. And Grace was screaming in the middle of the night about dinosaurs, saying, "Daddy, there are dinosaurs all over our room. They're going to eat me." She was freaked out. So my wife and I caught our breath, right? Didn't realize that everything was okay. And then we proceeded to teach Grace how dinosaurs were extinct, how they're not around anymore, how it's not possible for a Tyrannosaurus to even fit in your room, like crazy adult stuff like that. Well, the next night rolls around and 2:00 hits, and sure enough, screams again. So we are a little less urgent this time. We're a little less freaking out, and we're like, okay, here we go. So we walk into her almost said classroom. You can tell I'm thinking that was my problem, right? I walk into her bedroom and I'm like, "Baby, don't you remember last night? Dinosaurs are not a thing. It's impossible for them to be in your room. Don't you remember my awesome lesson about evolution and how dinosaurs were extinct?" Talking about extinction to a 2-year-old at 2:00 in the morning is really, really the definition of craziness. So put her to bed. Next night it rolls around, screams again. And so this night, in a moment of pure exhausted genius, I just said, "You know what? Turn on all the lights in the house." And so her and I, we flipped on all the lights. We suited up in imaginary hunting gear, and we cleared every single room of dinosaurs. She'd point it, I'd take it out. She'd point it, I'd take it out. She'd point it, I'd take it out, until I made her tell me, "Okay, Grace, are we clear of dinosaurs?" "Daddy, yeah, we are totally clear of dinosaurs." And then we lit a pretend campfire in her bedroom, and we had delicious dinosaur burgers together at around 2:15 in the morning. So put her to bed. She's excited, freaked out. I'm having a great time. My wife thinks I'm an absolute nutball. And so when the next night rolls around, 2:00 in the morning, Grace sleeps through the night. It's one of those things where, as a new parent, you're like, yes, she did it. We got a full night's sleep. And the reason for that is because rather than forcing Grace to enter into my story, right? Forcing Grace to try to think rationally at 2:00 in the morning, I knew Grace. I valued Grace. I thought about Grace and her perspective and her kind of worldview. and I connected and I designed my way out of it based on what she needed. That's engagement. That's the big idea around engagement is our learners come in with perspectives, with preferences, with worldviews. And we have to know our learners well enough to be able to connect those stories to the content that we need to teach. And then when we do that, we both value the humanness of our learners, we get really good at understanding our content, and we get them really excited about going deeper and deeper so that eventually it just becomes being about their content. And because they've seen it in the painted picture of their story. And so that's the big idea of the engagement guidelines. So the first one is providing options for recruiting interest. The second one is providing options for sustaining effort and persistence. And the third one, I'm probably going to blow this, move my face down a little bit, is providing options for self-regulation. And I'm going to, the reason why these visuals are here is it reminds me of a story from David Rose where he talked about this is exemplified by three music teachers for me. My first music teacher was awesome. She was super fun, super engaging. She even let me bring my plastic trumpet and learn how to play. And she got me hooked. My second music teacher was my band teacher. He was the one that had me work within the confines of a team, had me learn how to play within a band, and I got only so far. But I learned a ton of stuff about playing trumpet, and I really enjoyed it. And then this last one, providing options for self-regulation, is now exemplified by my professor in college, who's, when I went to play for him, he said, "You know what? I don't even know if you're good enough." And so I realized I want to play trumpet. I want to play for this specific professor. And so the professor gave me 2 weeks to practice one singular piece. And then at the end of that practice, and then at the end of that 2 weeks, he heard me play and he said I was barely good enough and he let me on. Well, I was so internally motivated and I was so stoked because I knew that playing for this professor is what will move me forward, that it didn't matter that it was tough to get in. It didn't matter that he wasn't overly excited. It just was, I was thrilled because it meant that I would get better at playing the trumpet. That story has stood out for me. That is for sure not my story. That's David Rose talking about how the progression, and it's been really helpful for me in memorizing, then providing options for recruiting interest, providing options for sustaining effort, and providing options for self-regulation. Thank you, David Rose. I'm so glad that you learned how to play the trumpet. The next big idea related to UDL is multiple means of representation. We're trying to answer the question of what is this concept that we're trying to teach? What is this big idea? What is the language related to this? And really thinking about your senses, how can I represent a concept in as many ways as possible? How can I make it a story? How can I show it through the lens of technology? How can I make kids hear about it, taste it even if they can, see it, touch it, smell it? In as many ways as I can, how do I make a concept clear to students? This is why we love analogies. This is why we love stories. This is why we love visuals. And depending on what I'm teaching, that's really going to be how I design or what I connect those representations to. We are not all visual learners. We are not all kinesthetic learners. We are not, that whole idea has been debunked for a number of years now. It's we pick and choose the best representations for us based on how we're feeling that day, what is going to be most clear for the goal, and what our preferences are, which change. And so it really comes down to us, then, the designer, representing concepts in a myriad of ways so that we're just ready for how you're feeling that day. And here's a visual of that. So this is all around fractions. So the concept fractions, historically, we did it by just putting we did it this way, which is so funny to me. It's totally an example of that kind of singular path of the bell curve where we're this is what most people can get. And, if I represent it this way, I can teach a kid an algorithm and they get the right answer. But it's crazy because they have no idea what those numbers and symbols represent. They have no idea what this concept is when you just represent it through the symbols. And so by making fractions really, really deep and really, really interesting, by making it, showing it through cutting cake and fraction tiles and Cuisinart rods and time and delicious candy and base 10 blocks and number lines, now fractions becomes like really deep and even could become radioactive, where you start to understand fractions well enough where you see them in the space of life. That is representation. And so what we're trying to do with representation is we're trying to provide options for experience, so like how we perceive information, and those options can be customized based on the needs of kids, offer alternatives for auditory, alternatives for visual, just representing the concepts in different ways, as simple as I can. Then representing the language and symbols of a concept in different ways, because there's certain pieces of language that are absolutely, sorry, my kid is outside and she's reaching into a nest, messing with bird eggs, and I'm about to, okay, we'll edit that out. But anyway, options for language and symbols, and then options for like how to understand the big ideas related to a concept, showing them in graphic organizers, showing them drawing and making those connections. That's what multiple means of representation is. Now that allows us to jump to multiple means of action and expression. And this is a question where we're really thinking about the how of the learning. How do we show our understanding? And in this visual for me has always been really helpful in thinking about, like, okay, so here's the standard. Students will use place value understanding to round multi-digit numbers to any place. Multiple means of action and expression says, well, I can get kids to satisfy the rigor of the standard by doing a screencast, by drawing that out, by writing in a journal, by using base 10 blocks, by using a number line. I genuinely don't care how they round as long as they meet the expectation and the rigor of the standard. That is an example of providing multiple means of action and expression. And we can give kids options in strategies, we can give kids options in tools, and we can give kids options in product. But we should be giving kids options all over the place so that they can start taking charge of their own learning. My wife's out there making sure that the eggs don't get robbed. It's so awesome. You can't see what I'm seeing, but my middle daughter's getting in trouble right now. So I promise we're almost done. Hopefully you pause this if I got long-winded, because I do. But so these are the big ideas: providing options for independence, executive functioning. That's the real deal stuff. That's what we should be getting into, like, for our learners, where they take control of the learning, where they set their own goals, they set their own strategies, they have to manage different tools and resources, and they have to monitor their own progress. So that's the top, like that's the executive functioning idea. And then moving to the next rung is providing options for communication. How do we give kids tools to communicate what they've learned? How do we get them used to, right, building and showing their understanding so that it meets our non-negotiables? And then this last one is like, how do we just give them options in terms of action? How do we let them connect on broad ways to tools and assistive technologies? We'll go deeper into this. We're going to stay pretty surfacey right now. Next week, we'll go deeper. So that is our screencast today. The goal of our screencast was for you to be able to articulate the foundations of universal design for learning. And so it'd be great for you to think through that, even post to our discussion board if any of this stuff sparked things within you. And I'll just leave you with this: a smooth sea never made a skillful sailor. That is a really important message that I believe in when it comes to designing instruction for kids. It's not only that our learners, we should do this